And I think this is a characteristic of the kind of way he led his life and mobilized and organized to make things happen. But I remember one time in northern BC, he was there in the presence of Prime Minister Trudeau. He managed to get Trudeau's advisors and people that were around him off the side, and he got into a walk with Trudeau that lasted about an hour. And I don't know exactly, I had different stories from him about it, but I don't know exactly what was said, but the point is that he did use that occasion to really drive home some points with regards to Aboriginal rights at the time. And he also was an organizer. He went out there and organized as best he could in a number of different settings, communities, and places all across this country in support and in solidarity with the First Nations and Aboriginal peoples fighting those struggles in the North. And he did it particularly around the time of the Berger Commission hearings. And I remember when we sat down with Berger and we tried to convince Berger that he not only had to do what he was doing so well in the North with regards to the Northern hearings, but he also needed to come south. And our argument was, you have to hold the government's feet to the fire. And the only way you're going to do that is by building up support in the south. And he did that. He followed the whole notion that to organize meant to educate, to agitate, and to mobilize. And he did that, and he did it very well in a lot of ways.
Talk about my brother.
And so, there is also a moment, though, that when you think of a warrior, you also think of a mix of danger and humor. And I remember the story that Carmel tells, which I love so much, and that is the story of her getting a call from foreign affairs officials when Hugh was in Haiti and pinned down in the crossfire between both sides in the fight that was going on, the battle in the streets that were going on in Haiti. And she listened and she heard the report and she was thankful for the concern that was being expressed. But then she said, before you go, she says, can you send him a message? Can you get a message to him? And they said, well, we'll try. And the message was simply this: tell him not to forget to bring home some of the bread. In other words, humor was also very much a part of the struggle itself. There was a dark side too, and I think it's really important that we keep in mind that Hugh had his moments and had his demons, like we all do, in varying ways. Some of those demons perhaps go back to childhood or various parts of his past. They go back certainly with his struggle with the bottle. But what was really important was the fact that he had an enormous amount of rage that would build up and pent up inside of him. And the question was, how did he deal with that? How did he deal with that rage? And while there were perhaps many ways he dealt with them, certainly one way was, as we all do, we tend to take it out on those around us, those that are close to us, and that hurts sometimes. These are the sides we don't talk about too much, and in those days we didn't talk about it much, partly because we always separated the personal from the political. And it took the women's movement to come along to correct that for us all, but in those days we didn't really see a lot of the personal that was going on. But it's important for us to acknowledge it as a part of the story itself. And I often wonder the pain and suffering that he saw firsthand in Rwanda, and what that meant to him and what that did to him, and perhaps it was his darkest moment of his life. I think we all know, those of us that know Hugh that well, know that he had a kind of a love-hate relationship with the church itself. But when he was in the midst of the horror of the genocide of the slaughter and the massacre that was taking place in Rwanda, and trying to get a grip on it, and trying to be able to write about it, and trying to be able to understand what was happening there. That must have been enormously painful in his life. And the title of his book, The Angels Have Left Us. As you know, as some of you probably know from reading the book, the title came from a woman who was kind of unconscious, but still alive, that they found in a church, buried under other bodies. And when she finally came to, she said, "The angels have left us." He experienced that like nobody else that I know of experienced the horror of Rwanda. And it must have eaten away at him, and it must have been a big part of the rage that would roar up inside of him. So that torment he lived with and carried on regardless. I guess in conclusion, I just asked myself, what really drove him? What was the driving force that kept him going? I asked that question in the last few months because, you know, about 3 months ago, I was finishing the manuscript of a book on the tar sands, and I said to him, you know, I've done this, I've got this far, and I said, well, you know, you want to take a look a little bit at a couple of chapters? He said, no. He says, I don't want to look at a couple of chapters, I want to look at the whole thing. So I tried to argue with him that it was too much, and he said, no, I want to see it. So he saw it, and he read every chapter, and he commented on every chapter, rather lengthily, I might add, in some places. And went into quite some diatribes at times, not being tough enough, things like that. And but something was driving him, even though he knew he was close to the end. And then, even though he was close to the end, just within a little over a month, 2 months ago, he got on a plane in a wheelchair and went up north one last time to be with the Decho, to be with Chief Jerry Antoine and all the other Decho. What drove him? What made him do this? And I guess that question will haunt me, perhaps, for the rest of my life, too.